Yeah.
I've already been matching with Councillor DeAndrade a few times.
Sorry?
Oh, no, talking about a tire. Councillor Lumley's got a black turtleneck on, and I almost did the same.
Okay, you're live
Okay,
now.
we're live now, so we'll proceed. The time being 3 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town of Gibson's for February 1st, 2022. We're being held electronically still and gathered on the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Welcome everybody here, and we have an agenda. There are no amendments that I'm aware of to this agenda. Corporate Officer, are we everything here?
Yep, everything's here. You're good to go.
Good, thank you. Seeing none, I'd like to first of all welcome back our CIO, Manny Machado. Manny's been away, as many of you know, for almost a year, and good to see you there, Manny, and good to look forward to a new future with you. So thank you for everything. So
yeah, appreciate the support to get here.
Yeah. So. But we have an agenda, and I'd like, first of all, a recommendation from council to approve the agenda. Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ladwig, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And now a recommendation to receive all of the reports that are on the agenda. Councillor DeAndrade, Councillor Kroll, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. So we'll go right into the first report under 3.1 with the Director of Planning. And this is the request for proposal, development permit areas 1 and 2 update. Director of Planning, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome. Thank you. I'll let you take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you might recall in October, Council passed a resolution to draft an RFP to update DPA number 1, which is the geotechnical development permit area, and DPA number 2, which is the environmental development permit area, to draft an RFP and bring it back to council before February 15th. So here we are, just in time. And I just want to remind council, we are also in the process of updating DPA 9, which is the aquifer development permit area. So once this is out, we'll be working on updating all 3 of those development permit areas. A staff report was brought to council on September 7th outlining the scope of work, and council approved that approved the scope of work and asked us to draft the RFP. So that scope of work is in the RFP, which is attached to this report. It's very much the same. There has been a little bit more added to it since that initial report, and the additions have been mostly focused on development permit area number 2. So staff through the CAO worked with Councillor DeAndrade on including some language around identifying wildlife corridors. So right now, under the Gospel Rock sub area under DPA number 2, it talks about wildlife corridors, but we're explicitly adding it for all of Gibson's to look at where wildlife corridors are and get recommended protection measures from the qualified professionals. And also another new scope is identifying keystone species habitat and getting recommended protection measures for that habitat. So that's the new change since it was brought forward in September. Everything else is going to be looking at updating the mapping and the text updates to clarify report requirements, updating the best management practices for both geotechnical and the environmental sensitive lands, and then bringing forward the new OCP updates, the new development permit area in an OCP update, and then that would be going through the OCP amending process, which would include a public hearing. So there's a short summary. If you have any questions, I can answer them or try my best.
Well, thank you, and thank you, and I'm sure that there will be some questions. So we'll go on. I guess my big question is the budget. Is $25,000 enough? This looks like a fairly large scope of work, although I appreciate they're not starting from scratch. but how do you feel about the budget?
So council previously approved 60,000 for DPA number 1.
Yeah.
So the 25,000 was added to that 60,000 for a full budget of 85,000.
Okay,
And when we had initially reached out to the professionals to get a quote, we didn't include the wildlife corridor piece or the keystone species habitat. But through preliminary conversations with environmental professionals, they said they can do a lot of that through a desktop study. So I threw it in here, and I figured with a large budget of 85,000, putting the two RFPs together, we might be able to get some professionals, geotechnical engineers and environmental professionals to partner and submit a proposal on this together. I'm hoping we can.
okay, thank you. I'll defer to council for any other questions or for next questions, but thank you, Councillor Lumley. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is kind of like on process, is like if council, I gotta have a couple questions. I'll just, if council hadn't requested it, I guess these DP areas would just sit as they are, but is there any way, or is there anyone that, if you say you spent this money and updated are there continuous updates that can be drawn from the other municipalities? Say you're reading somewhere that someone had updated theirs and you thought, well, that'd be great to update ours. Like, is it possible, instead of doing these entire reworkings, that we continually update, like, I don't know, maybe even on an annual basis, just from new ideas or new updates from other municipalities? And council would just agree to add that to our development permit area? That's my question.
Director of Planning?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on what the scope of the work is for the update. And I think municipalities, and like, for example, we would potentially partner with the regional district if they were looking at, they recently updated their geotechnical development permit areas 5 years ago or so, maybe a bit around that time. So that would have been a good time to partner with them and share the cost of hiring a professional. Because the marine shoreline geotechnical hazards are probably pretty similar. The ravine, the standard of flood construction levels and stuff like that would have probably been similar. But yeah, as the standards change, we could budget for that to update our development permit areas, and we haven't yet. So this is just the town of Gibson's moving ahead. We are having conversations with the regional district about a baseline study for the regional growth strategy. And through that, we're talking about DPA number 9 and how we can work together on our fringe areas and how we can look at aquifer protection. But those are, at this point, pretty preliminary conversations.
Follow-up, Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, okay, maybe I didn't explain it. Like, say the Income Tax Act. Like, every time like tax change, they don't look at the entire Income Tax Act. They just implement changes into it. That's kind of like where my question was. Like, if you pay all this money to update your permit areas, why can't we say even 6 months something comes around the corner from maybe a professional magazine or a municipality? Maybe you've spoken to another planner and you say, well, that would like fit in right with the town. Why don't I introduce that to council, and then council could vote to add it to our current, like, is that not a possibility? I get it. It's a government thing. You send out RFPs and you spend tons of money, but I'm just thinking as an ongoing that cannot not live organically. Instead of every 5 years, you got to pay somebody $80,000. Who knows what it's going to be in the future to complete something that's probably going to stay majorly the same, with a few updates, just to update because people learn more things about the environment and more things about animals over time. That's maybe I'm not explaining it right. Like, it's just kind of this constant updating that could maybe take place without having to redo everything every time. I don't know. Does anyone else understand what I'm maybe trying to say? But anyway, I understand partnering up on, my question was that just doing these major overhauls, and a lot of it will stay the same. That's all.
Go to Councilor Diendrad. I don't know, you had your hand up then, Councilor Kroll.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I get what Councilor Longley is saying, but the thing is, first, the environment does change. I mean, there are new impacts that were not, it didn't exist before. So it's not like the income tax that, you have, it's just a methodology and you're just changing the aspect. In this particular case, there has been development pressures, climate change impacts, right? So the environment is not the same. Another issue, I think, is in previous work that has been done in the town of Gibson, some have been a little bit more in-depth, others not necessarily. So we don't really have a full scope from the environmental perspective, right? For example, we talk species at least, how many times we have really a field biologist going and identifying. Yes, we had for Gospel Rock many, many years ago, and we had in 2019 for a specific area, but we haven't done, even in 2018, the report that was done for Charman Land identified that things are not necessarily identified, right? So when it comes to the environment, you have the substrate, and then you have also the species that move around. So it's a whole interaction. So it's, yes, if we had done in-depth field review that we knew every single species and we were, following up, then yeah, maybe it's just improving some guidelines. But I think in our case, there's a little bit more work to be done in terms of assessing, for example, keystone species. And I hope at this point, Councillor understands the importance of identifying keystone species, because we have also the mandate to identify species at risks, which I don't see here in this report. And I'll make some suggestions. First of all, I really appreciate already some moving forward to update the DPA2, and I appreciate some inclusions. But for example, critical species at risk, if we don't identify with field work, we don't know that we have, so we cannot protect. And one thing with field work, we have to do in the right time, depending on the species. It has to be some stuff you cannot do during the winter. And I know throughout these reports that have done throughout the years, many things have not been identified for several reasons. So it's perhaps if we do a very good field work this time, we might have, but over time you need to go back and understand, have drought, for example, or the impact of rain alter the ecosystems. So that's not necessarily, a book that you have the guideline and you look, well, in case, so you need to understand first, it's like your body, right? How can I prescribe something to you? In 5 years, you'll not be the same. So Mayor, maybe I'll stop now, let other councillors, but I have a few suggestions to include. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Kroll.
I fully appreciate where Councillor Lumley's coming from. And I think the issue is that once we have this, are we going to have to be spending buckets of money to keep it updated if we see things that have come forward in other documentation and from other communities and municipalities? Can we just, import it into our DPAs without having to go out for bringing in a consultant to address it? I think that's where he was coming from, if I'm not wrong. So it's not like if Seashell does a study for their DPAs and there's something that comes out of that we would like to incorporate in ours, can we just incorporate it with an act of council? Or
Can.
these documents aren't copyrighted, so it's not like you're impinging on copyright or something like that if you import something. Would that be correct?
I think what you would do is refer it to staff for recommendation to council and say, is this something that we should be addressing at this time? But one of the things you do want to do is have some stability in your bylaw process so that when people own a piece of property or are thinking of developing a piece of property, the goalposts don't continue to change every few months. But we do change the zoning bylaw with people apply for a change to zoning, and we change the zoning bylaw, and we do also change the OCP bylaw in the same way. These bylaws can change, and you hope that by going out and doing this in a rigorous way with a qualified consultant, you're going to get the best of the best recommendation of the day. But there could be a provincial legislation come through that might impact what we might want to do or how we might want to do. We might want to make an amendment. So amendments are possible at any time.
Thank you.
Councillor Ladwig?
Yeah, I think the point's mostly been made, but just in support of what Councillor Lumley was saying, and Councillor DeAndrade, actually, like I agree that we kind of need to do a thorough review right now, and I think it's fine to spend resources to do that. But to Councillor Lumley's point, I do kind of wonder if maybe in the future, and it's just an idea, I think it's a valid one to think about, whether or not the DPAs could have an annual referral process, almost in a sense. Like, could you be referring it out to whatever the subject matter experts might be, and just saying, is our DPAs up to speed, or is there anything that you see missing in them? If no, then it's just a check. Great, it comes back to council. We send it out to our list of referrals, whoever that might be for that particular subject matter. They all think that they're looking fairly good, so we can consider this kind of check for this year. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if you send it off to a referral that might say, actually, we now know that the spotted owl has been cited in Gibson's, then staff could bring it to us and say, we might need to look at this. Does that make sense? I think I was trying to support what Councilor was saying, like some kind of an annual checklist in a sense.
Director of Planning, you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I think when looking at our existing development permit areas, we could do a quick referral to say, hey, is this still right? But I think part of this update for the geotechnical hazard areas, for example, we don't have a lot of areas that identify steep slopes, rockfall hazards, stuff like that. And that's where we really need a professional to come in and have their standards for how they're going to identify these steep slopes and what the top of cliff setback would be, or something like that. So I'm thinking of Skyline Drive, the bluff area. It's rocky, it's steep. Hardly any of it is in a development permit area, but maybe it should be for safety. And that's something that a qualified professional would need to look at and identify. So there's that. There's also the in terms of identifying new habitat for some species at risk or yellow listed species or something. They would need to identify that habitat, and then you would sort of say you've identified the habitat, you would draw a buffer around that habitat and require a development permit for any development within that buffer. So, I mean, one approach could be to just put a blanket development permit area on all of Gibson's and require every single person to go through a development permit process, which has an added cost. Someone wants to put in a landscape retaining wall. Do they need to get a DP? Someone needs to, enclose a carport. They might be digging out a new foundation. Do they need a DP? So this is where we rely on the professionals to say, okay, this is where the trigger should be. This should be exempt. And they come up with those standards, and staff, we give them examples of what the development community is looking at. These are what comes across our desk, and work through these scenarios to come up with a list of exemptions and come up with with the requirements, basically. So it is very much, we do very much rely on those professionals to, to work to a certain standard, and we give them scenarios and work with them to come up with a development permit area that makes sense, that and for a professional to come in and do a report, they would have clear criteria on what they need to identify in order to build safely or mitigate any impacts in that specific development permit area.
Yeah, I think what it depends on too is developing a relationship, a long-term relationship with your consultant and engineer. I mean, we have that with our engineers, we have that with our auditors. So you want to do somebody like this, if you're really happy with the report and the work that they do, continue to retain them, because they don't have to go to square one every time. Whereas if you went out to another engineer, that other engineer might say, oh, wait a minute, I've got to actually go and dig back into this ground. Even though somebody else has done it, I might see something different. And so that working with for a long-term basis with a professional, I think it's a way to go on something like this. And then asking them, is there anything this year that we should be looking at to update the report that you did for us last year? And that will be the relationship you want to have. Councilor Diandrat?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to take into account that ecosystems are dynamic, right? It's like an organism, right? It won't stay. We're not going to be the same in 5 years. And then we have a lot of other influences. So if we really want to conserve what we have, actually, it should be part of the budget to have, I agree with Mayor Beamish, right? Someone that could, has, not only through DPA's approval, but we can also have some ongoing research, because species change over time. There are other major influences that it might be, climate-wise, or just pertaining to the town of Gibson that might impact certain species. And then there are other things. For example, one thing, just as some feedback on the RFP, I didn't see any acknowledgement that we are now part of the Biosphere Reserve. And one of the most important goals for a Biosphere Reserve is the conservation of landscapes, ecosystems, species, and genetic variation. So this is really important to be on the request for proposal, because this would, determine the kind of work, right? If you're just looking at ecosystem, just for their beauty, you might want to cut some trees or eliminate some animals or whatever, right? But if you're looking for ecosystem health and ecosystem resistance and resilience, which are the words that we have to incorporate now in everything we do, because of the incredible impacts of climate change and development, both, right? If we want to conserve what we have, I believe this must be in the request for a proposal. And I don't see here any mention of that. So I really would like this to be an acknowledgement. The work that, another input that I would like to have, it's the professional here on page 24 of the agenda, talks about a registered professional biologist or qualified environmental professional. On my feedback, I actually suggested, like, with long-term experience in BC coastal ecosystems, delineating both fish and terrestrial habitats and assessing critical habitat, identifying keystone species and species at risk, and also submit a work plan recommending appropriate time period to conduct surveys. This is on my first feedback. Why this is so important? It's the same as if you go to a doctor to identify a disease. If you go to an expert, he will see things. And if you go to a generalist, the generalist might not see enough. So if we want to identify keystone species in order to better protect our environment, we need someone with very long-term experience first in BC habitats, because if you get someone coastal, if you get someone from the interior, even if the person can be great, but it's not the same, right? And then second, it should be someone that has done this often, and that would facilitate the work and the management guidelines. So another feedback that I would like to provide that's on page 23. When we talk, the update for DPA2 will include the following work. We don't have project management here, so I wonder why, because we have for DPA1. And then field reviews are also not specified, right? On DPA1, there is a specification, site visit, field reports. Here it's just more general, so it would be relevant to identify. And then when we talk about the third bullet, DPA update, mapping and tax update to clarify reportment requires update best management practices. I think it's very important to say that the guidelines need strengthening and specificity, because I think a lot what our previous DPA, our current, DPA2, it's sometimes lacks specificity. But I think it's important to say, to ensure ecosystem species resistance and resilience to climate change and development impacts. And also ask the consultant to whether DPA2 boundaries should be expanded, because again, of impacts of climate change, we might have to expand the boundaries. And actually the suggestion or the inference that Director of Planning said, that if the whole town should be under DPA, I know it seemed a little bit cumbersome, but at the same time, when you talk about ecosystem, one thing influences another. So ideally, yes. So whatever we do, we know that we're impacting another environment. So I think this is really important to be in this report, because I think the field biologists need to understand what really it's the scope of the work. It's just not a desktop analysis of, well, maybe we could improve. Yes, there are things that we can do based on desktop, but I think we need to understand what's happening on the ground, and also to acknowledge we have climate change, and the only way we're gonna conserve this species is if we can increase their resistance and resilience to climate change. So I would like to have that too. Other things that I would like to, that I comment on my first feedback too, it's a mechanism for risk analysis and peer review. I know we encountered this with the George, and it might happen again. So if we could put in on the guidelines, mention, first of all, doesn't mean that every single DPA would need a peer review. Of course not. But depending on the project, council might ask whether council wants, because of whatever situation, or there's a even suggestion that this by professionals that this should be, then the the developer won't be surprised, because I think what happened last time, we were questioning whether we could ask the developer for a peer review. I would like this to have, and also a mechanism for risk analysis. We need to, I think this has to be clear. The George raised a lot of issues. I think, what is the risk? What is the tolerance? Are we involving our community in assessing the tolerance as well? Could be a technical review, but also could be the tolerance of the community. Do we want that as a community? So I think we should have a matrix. And I believe urban system had some sort of risk matrix in their stormwater report. So Other suggestion, I didn't see anything regarding identifying buffer zones and provide best management practice for the buffer zones too. I understand this could be in the scope of expanding the DPA too, which might not be necessary in certain areas, but it might be in others.
Let's stop there and give Director Planner a chance to respond if she got all that, or anybody else a chance to have a word.
Thank you.
I can respond a little bit. So I guess identifying the Biosphere Reserve, that can be added. We can add a line in the RFP to identify that. I guess my question is more around the scope of work. What is council looking for here? Because it sounds like the scope of work is very much changing to what was previously approved by council. So we do have 4 sub areas under DPA number 2, and they are very specific. So we've got the environmentally sensitive lands at Gospel Rock, including forested lands, wildlife corridors, and wetlands. We've got possible petroleum contamination sites on the shoreline. We've got environmentally sensitive lands related to riparian areas by creeks. So that's looking at fish and fish habitat. And we've got the environmentally sensitive marine shore areas and eelgrass beds. So when you're talking about the Biosphere Reserve, what are you wanting to accomplish with the development permit area? What is the scope of the report that you're looking to receive? What are the parameters around protection? So that scope of work just needs to be narrowed down so we can address it or get what we want out of it. And then, so that's one part. The other part was species at risk. So there is a Species at Risk Act. So there are federal regulations around the species at risk. There are federal regulations around migratory birds as well. So there are federal regulations. So how are we supporting those regulations or enhancing them and not taking over them? Or I guess that's another question. In terms of the qualifications, on page, on section 5.1.1 of the request for proposal, it talks about having a qualified geotechnical engineer, a qualified coastal engineer, so that's someone who specializes in marine shorelines and coastal shorelines, and a qualified or a registered professional biologist or qualified environmental professional. So those are the 3 professionals that we would be looking to work with to give us direction on this. And it included here to have at least 5 years of relevant experience. Through that, what we would get is the proposal on how they're going to address this, and the next step in this process would be to bring forward the proposals, and council would select the consultant. So that's that part. But I guess in general, if the scope of work isn't to look at what we've got and to update it, and it's more around climate change implications, what does that mean to council, and what are you hoping to get out of a development permit area when someone comes in and wants to build a house? What do you want the report to say? What are the criteria you're looking for? What do you want the professionals to look for? So that's something I need more guidance on to address. I guess that's my preliminary thoughts on that.
One concern I have is that, I understand what Councilor is getting at. I just wonder at what point in time do we price housing or development out of the possibility here? I mean, we see prices going up all the time. We keep adding costs to projects. Any of these things will add costs to a developer project. and small or large if they're in an impacted area. So are we looking at perfection here? Are we looking at best practice? Are we looking at being the leader? And then, yeah, as I said before, we can be the leader, and we can have a community that is a real model community in the environment. Most people can't afford to be here, but some can, and then that works out well for them. So I guess I'm just concerned that how much cost do we add to the development process through going through all these things when we require anybody to get all these studies done. So just a general question for council. I mean, price of houses is going skyrocket. Price of buildings is going skyrocket, and we're looking at affordable housing. So, Councillor Kroll, I'll go to you next and then come back.
I appreciate what Councillor Dendretti's saying and the concerns she has for the environment and climate impact in one thing and another. But we're reaching out to consultants to ask them to give us the best practices with all the information they have available. It sounds like, we're saying it like we're telling them how to do their job. And I would expect for $85,000 that a professional consultant who's worth his salt would come back to us with all these bases covered, because they're aware of what's happening around us. I don't think they're sitting in ivory towers somewhere, singing folk songs. They're providing valuable information to communities. So I'm just a little concerned if we, this is going to come back to us. If we see things that have been admitted, fine, they can be drawn, to the attention of. But I'd be very surprised that if a lot of the issues that Councillor Dendretti hasn't mentioned wouldn't be addressed by a reputable consultant.
Councillor Dendretti.
Thank you. I think first of all, and I appreciate the point that Mayor Beamish said, because, and that's, I think, is the goal. If you do a good field review and understand what we have, and then what are the goals? I think the first thing is to establish, right? Because we are, obviously, we care about our environment. We want to preserve our environment. So how to preserve our environment? Now we are part of a biosphere reserve that has some goals. So in order to have genetic variation, and that's why wildlife corridors are so important, because it's going to facilitate that we maintain genetic variation and other things. So I think if we have a good field work and very good management guidelines, so when I have to, let's say in the area I live, if I'm going to do some construction, there will be management guidelines. I might not even need to trigger a consultant, right? It might, the same way that you have guidelines how to build a house to address stormwater issues, etc. We would have the guidelines for the area, and depending, obviously, of where the construction is located, that might require, for example, in the case of Gospel Rock, in-depth research with a DPA to a consultant. But doesn't mean that being a DPA, I don't see that every single time you would trigger, you have to, the developer will need to hire a consultant necessarily. If we have very strong guidelines for the area, it could be, a lot of the work could be done. But I think we need to know what we want from this consultant. And if we are really serious about the Biosphere Reserve, then we have to fulfill the requirements of the Biosphere Reserve. I say that we are in the Biosphere Reserve, but we are not fulfilling the goal of the Biosphere Reserve. So if you want to fulfill the goal, we need to identify where's the critical habitat. I mean, we are having crisis with our salmon. How are we going to ensure that we have enough water in the rivers? Can we do that? Maybe it's out of scope, but maybe in our riparian areas, we need to do a better work. Maybe that's what we need to ask the consultant. How can we increase that in face of climate change, meaning to increase resilience of the ecosystems, right? how can we maintain the flow of the creeks? Perhaps we need to expand our riparian zones beyond the regulations from provincial regulations.
Councilor
Right.
Ludwig?
And Mayor Beamish, can I just one point of risk analysis that I mentioned? It wasn't about species at risk. It's risk analysis of a project, right? The George was a good example, right? When, with the threat of breaching the aquifer, there was no risk analysis in place that where the community could have some input. I think this is a mechanism. We have to have a risk and a mechanism to really weight a project of this scale. So that's what I'm talking about. And when it would trigger peer review, and the fact that it is on DPA, so the developer won't be surprised depending on the project that you might have to do a peer review, but doesn't mean that every project will need a peer review.
Councilor Ludwig?
But just to clarify, Councillor DeAndretti, every project would have to apply for a DPA permit. And that alone is, I think, $500, and it's time consuming, and it has to be processed by staff. And all just to tell you that I've got a 50 by 150 square foot piece of land covered in grass. And so I just don't know that this is necessarily, I totally support what you're trying to do here. I just don't know if that's the right approach. So let me just finish my thought. Like, I think, for example, I would love to see us develop a climate resiliency action plan. And I don't know where we sit on that these days, whether we've got one or don't have one or what have you. But, like things that we could not easily, but things that we could be doing as a community to increase biodiversity, to increase our resiliency to stormwater management, to ensure species at risk are protected. So, there's a bunch of, I'd love to see us just plant more trees everywhere. Like, we could be planting trees all over town land, no problem, So there's a number of things we could be doing, and we could be setting goals in a climate change action plan. And then that would give us some direction as to what we're wanting to do with something like a DPA 2 permit area. But I think for right now, I think the things that the Director of Planning has identified as very specific things that we need to ensure we're protecting makes sense. And I think for this stage of town planning, I think it makes sense that we clearly identify what those things are. And if you do have thoughts on what she could put into this RFP, those kind of specific components, that I think now is the time to say so. But I think just doing a blanket DPA is very cumbersome and costly for the community. And I don't necessarily think it's the most effective way of getting at some of these broader ecosystem objectives that you're trying to achieve, which I totally respect.
Councilor DeAndretti?
First of all, it's not my objective. It's the fact that we sign up to be part of the Biosphere Reserve. I want to remind Council, it's not my objective. I actually participated in the very the end of the process, and probably my participation wouldn't matter where the Biosphere was going. I just supported. But so first of all, and I think the things that what I'm asking, it's just some details. For example, with the professional biologists, I understand we talk about 5 years of relevant experience, but we didn't describe, I think, a little bit of more descriptions with experience. If we say in experience in delineating critical habitat and identify keystone species, now you're saying, well, I want this kind of professional here because they can, just by understanding the composition of our ecosystems and looking for, the clues, they would understand the keystone species. And that's what I'm saying. I just some detail. But these are the input that I'm giving. It's just the details, because if we don't ask, we don't get, right? And I think this is the time to ask right now, not wait for the proposal to go and then come back and say, well, we would like that too. Sometimes I think that the $25,000 won't be enough. I mean, understanding that the 60 was reserved for DPA 1. And even if you look at the comparison, why DPA 1 was asked $60,000, but a DPA 2 is just 25. Doesn't mean that we're going to get some money that was for DPA 2 and put on the DPA 2, for the DPA 1 and put on the DPA 2. So these are considerations that I know we talk about saving money, but at the same time, we are talking about the biggest crisis in our planet right now. It's biodiversity. If you want the top one, we are losing biodiversity. And the thing is, if you don't have resilience, it's like your body, right? The moment you have a lot of disease, you don't recover. So what you want to attain, if you want to recover from impact, you have to have resilience. So all these wordings, I'm not inventing. This is not just a dream. This is a reality. Either we want to do it or we don't want to do it, but we are part of the Biosphere Reserve. We are the gateway of the biosphere, and not really having an approach that we can attain what a biosphere is supposed. To me, it's a wishful thinking.
Councilor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I think maybe perhaps we should take this off the agenda and go back to the drawing board for the RFP, because my understanding was that Councillor D'Andretti helped draft what she wanted to see in it, but it's apparently all that was missed. So, we could spend days here. I fully understand where Councillor D'Andretti is coming and her concerns about the climate and the environment and species. But, if we're going to go out for an RFP, we have to give them a direction of what we want. And right now we're doing things on the fly again. I thought the direction that staff provided for the direction for the RFP, because this is presumably going to come back from various companies with various things. We may discover that what we're asking for at this point isn't within the financial spectrum of what we can even afford at this point without having to go, revisit finances to see if we can afford it. So either we take it off the table, redraft what we want in the RFP, or, capture a couple of the points that have been made. But it seems like the shopping wish list for what we want contained within this thing is growing exponentially. And I can't see us getting it covered in this meeting this afternoon.
Councilor Ledwig, you had your hand up?
I support what Councillor Kroll just said as well. I think what I'm struggling with is I'm not even sure that I'm following Councillor D'Andre, what it is that you want to see added in the RFP. And so if I understood it better, I could speak to it better and say what I think of that. Is it that you're asking the consultant, are you wanting a bullet put in the RFP that asks the consultant to review the criteria of the Biosphere Reserve commitment and to ensure that our developments are meeting those commitments? Is that what you're asking for? Like, I'm just not clear on what, and so I'm just wondering, so this is why I'm kind of supporting Councillor Kroll's suggestion. Like, if you provided a bulleted list that you'd like to see added in it, then it would probably make this conversation easier.
Councilor D'Andretti?
Yes, I think at the beginning I said few bullets. Actually, there's not too many things. I think staff is in a good direction. I think one of the bullets, I think it's just to elaborate on the credentials of the professional, the biologist, just to ensure that the person is expert. Another adding is just to I think we need to specify talk about that we are in a biosphere reserve, because there's a goal of being in a biosphere reserve, a conservation goal. And either we try to meet, or then we don't do that. And the goal is to, when you provide management guidelines, it's to, I think we have to say, it's to create environmental resilience, right, of the ecosystem and species, right? Because climate change is coming back. In 10 years, we're going to see so much impact. And what are we doing? So we need to have an idea of possible things that we can do to support that our ecosystem withstand all climate change impacts, not only climate change, but development impacts too. So these are few. I also talked about a mechanism for risk analysis and peer review. I think it's important that we went through this through the other GPA, through the current GPA. And I talk about buffer zones. I mean, buffer zones could be obviously, if we talk about the goal that we want our ecosystems to become resilient, that might be a natural extension that the consultant suggests buffer zones. But buffering, I think, is important, right? Because you can have specific management guidelines for buffer zones.
Councillor Lumley?
If I hear Councillor Cole and Councillor Ladwig, I think what they're saying is that this isn't a good use of our time. Listening to Councillor DeAndre just go over point after point after point because we're just staring at a screen. Maybe we could move this to another meeting. She could submit her points to staff, and staff could give us their, I mean, it would just be better than just sitting here listening to people go back and forth on something that I have no idea about. So at least if she put her points out to everybody and then staff could respond to them, at least I could follow along. Like right now, it's like, trailing off here. I'm sorry, but I'm not that I don't agree with anything or don't. It'd be nice if I could maybe spend a little time myself and try and comprehend it. So anyway, that's I think that's where they were going with that. And if we could move that, that'd be great. And Councillor DeAndre could submit her points to staff and they could answer it. And when it comes back, then we can discuss it. It'll be all in front of our faces.
I think the one thing council should understand though is that requests for proposals are just that. I mean, there is evaluation criteria, and when we ask for professionals, when staff ask for professionals, qualified professionals with relevant experience and background, that's for the evaluation process to take a look at and say, this is not the relevant background relative to what we are looking for. So that you look at it in that context, you don't have to, for most of the professionals who you're dealing with out there, you don't have to spell that out. I mean, I do appreciate perhaps in the context statement or the scope of services, page 21, referencing the biosphere, because that is new in terms of it wasn't part of what had been considered prior. And I think that's probably part of the background to the town now, that we actually exist in the context of a biosphere. And it's something that should alert the professionals to say, and there could be a reference to that. But I think that you'll never get it perfect. You'll never get it just right. And the evaluation process as you go through reviewing proposals is the place to look at that and say, what's the best proposal for what we are and what we can't afford. I mean, right now you got $85,000 on the table. That's not enough for a lot of things I'm hearing, but it's significant. So although I'm in favor of putting it forward, I guess I'm also in favor of moving it forward. And I'm just wondering what time frame we're looking at if we push it back to staff who also have other priorities to get on with. So Councillor Crowell, then Director of Planning.
When in this evening's reading file, there's a fairly lengthy correspondence from Councillor D'Andretti. I believe it's probably about 150 pages or more with respect to these issues. So, with no disrespect to the effort she's put in towards this project, and I know she's had some dialogue back and forth with the CAO and staff. Yes, and I would like to see this move forward. But as you said yourself, sir, we are going to get proposals back from the consultants. And maybe what we need to do is move this forward. I agree with you, highlight the biosphere that is part of the background with respect to the town on page 21.2.1, include that in there somewhere, get this out. And then if Councillor Dendretti, when the proposal comes back and we select someone who appears to have the appropriate qualification, we can say at that point, and please could you consider these however many points, and try and, like there was probably 15 pages of bibliography in Councillor Dendretti's letter in the communication file that we received. So, yes, it's a critically important issue, and it is important to everyone, and I'm not wanting to play it down in any way, shape, or form, but we have to get something happening with it. And as I said earlier, this may go out and it comes back that we can't even afford it. So we're going to have to see what we can, tailor it to our needs. But I would suggest we move this forward with a couple of the points that have been addressed. And then when we get proposals back, fine tune it. But right now we're asking for a chocolate cake recipe, and we're telling them how to make it, what ingredients we want. And, we're almost doing their job for them with all the stuff that we're wanting to pack into it. So yes, I'm in favor of moving it forward if we can do it with a couple of caveats.
Director of Planning, what does this do to your timeline?
That's a good question. I think, if council moves it forward, then it would go to RFP and we get proposals and see how they meet what we've asked for. And we would grade them and bring it forward to council with a recommendation on who to go forward with. If council wants to kick this back to another committee, it really depends on what you're wanting me to work on and what the change of scope of work is. It might include some more research on how much the change of scope is going to cost, and it might come back with a budget request. Councillor D'Andrade and the CAO and I have been in communications on a lot of it. A lot of it is out of scope of a development permit area, unfortunately. So when we're talking about peer reviews, that's really peer reviewing. The intention is to have clear criteria that a professional can meet. If they can't meet the criteria, then at that point we would say, okay, we need another professional opinion. Or if they've met the criteria and the decision maker looks at it and goes, that doesn't look right, I'm curious to get another perspective, then we would get a peer review. But to get a peer review on a standard DP application is not appropriate. So, but that is very much a council decision on what the criteria is, and that's been talked about as part of the delegation authority bylaw. So that's the avenue to take. It's not in the development permit area itself. In terms of buffer zones, that's a standard best practice. So that it talks about updating the development permit areas with best practices. Buffer zones are a standard best practice. That's part of this process. We have buffer zones. There's only one development permit area that doesn't have buffer zones, and which happened to be Gospel Rock. So there's that. In terms of public input, again, that's going to be council's decision on what's your criteria around getting public input on a development permit. How much public input do you want? What's that process going to look like? But that's all about the delegation to the decision-making authority on development permits and your process. So that is a separate scope of work to updating the development permit area specifically.
Councillor Diandrad, I'll let you have another word, then we have to move forward. We have to make a
Yeah,
decision.
I think in this conversation, I try to explain certain things for council to understand. But what I think, I mean, I appreciate, yes, disclosing that we are part of the biosphere, so that would focus what the goals are. And I think when we talk about update best management practice, I think what I would like to see is to ensure that our ecosystems and species, right, have resistance and resilience to climate change. I think it's the focus, because now we have the full goal. If we just say update best management practice, to me, it's to lose. I think it's important to say, we want to conserve our ecosystems, right? We want to have best management practice that attain this goal. So that's what I'm focusing. And I think, for example, we didn't talk about flow of creeks, but if we focus again that the goal, it's conservation and create resilience, that would be something that we can expect, that the consultant will look for ways to address this issue. So I think it's important to have the objective there. And with regard to the credential of the biologist, I think if it's better if we also specify, but it's fine if council wants to move. I think, yeah, this is just some details that help to determine, right, who are we getting and what the proposal is.
Can we do this, council? Can we move this forward? There is a recommendation, a request for proposal to update development permit areas 1 and 2, PLN 2022-01, be approved, subject to further discussion between the Director of Planning, Councilor Diandrad, and the CAO, and that it be moved to the next council agenda for September, or September, yeah. That'd be nice if that was the next council agenda. No, the next council agenda in February for adoption, for approval, because I think we do need to get this moving forward. And I don't mind making minor tweaks to it, but it is an update of an existing development permit that's not starting from scratch. So, Director of Planning.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in terms of my timeline there, I'm going to be working on a short-term rental report for that next, for the February 15th agenda. And then the one following, I was hoping to bring forward the housing strategy.
Okay.
So if anything, I could get to this for like mid-March, early April, unless council wants me to push those other, the housing reports down and make this a priority.
No, I think the type of change we're talking about here, Director, is relatively minor in terms of the scope of work, is relatively acknowledging that we are in a biosphere and a zone. I don't mind putting a couple of points in there. I mean, if it's a matter of looking at the qualification of professionals, for example, this is what we're looking for. I don't see it requires a major rewrite in my mind. If that were all it took to move it forward, then it could be on the next council agenda, because it's going to have to come to the council agenda anyway. So, Director? Yeah.
I would suggest then, if those are the changes, we could just put them right in. So it could be approved subject to referencing the Biosphere Reserve in section, what section is that?
Page 21,
in section 2.1 of the background.
Yeah.
And then what's that other bullet? We could just
the
do
one
that
was
right
on
now.
the professional qualifications and looking at somebody with specifically with coastal experience.
A biologist with coastal experience?
Well, in assessing fish and terrestrial habitat, and also identifying species at risk and keystone species, right, with familiarity, because that's what you want, someone that can just jump and know what they're doing. And if we can, as part of the goal, as you know, what are the DPAs to protect the species, protect ecosystems and species? I think the main goal is to create resilience, right? Squamish is updating their environmental guidelines. It's about resilience. If we don't create ecosystem and species resilience, they're not going to survive. It's going to be a whole different environment in 30 years or something. It may be anyways, but at least we are looking at.
So I could add to part 3.3, the goal of creating ecosystem resilience.
I think on the DPA update, mapping and text update to clarify report requirements, update best management practice to ensure ecosystem and species resistance and resilience to climate change and development impacts.
Is that within the scope of this project though? I guess I'm just wondering if that's in the scope of it's
very high level.
yeah.
So I
okay.
mean, the scope of the specific areas have simmered it down to, like, riparian areas have simmered it down to that riparian corridor, that habitat. So by protecting that riparian habitat, you are in effect protecting biodiversity in that corridor. Resilience to climate change it's a very high level concept. So to look at that at a site level, at a development scale, it's tricky, but that can be a high level goal.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we're looking at contamination on the shoreline, we're looking at reducing the contamination potential. We're looking, so the scope is different, but we can add language to reference ecosystem resilience as a high level goal. I see the CIO has.
I guess I'm concerned that when it comes back, that could become the focus of the evaluation. Well, if we're not, how are we protecting climate change, and is this the right document to do that in on a development permit document? CIO, how are you on this?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I was just going to make some of the comments that the Director of Planning, Leslie Ann, had said, that, you know, we have just a couple of amendments that if we have clarity on what those are. We've done our best to look at what Councillor D'Andrea had submitted within what we felt was the scope of the DPA and what we could ask for. Albeit it's not going to be as extensive because it's quite wielding to include everything in an OCP or everything in a DPA. But we've done our best to focus on looking at the budget provided plus the timelines given to actually get this RFP out. And I think, as Councillor Kroll mentioned, there's nothing to prohibit us from looking at the terms of reference and the successful component and providing an addendum to the contract to add more work based on the budget capabilities of the town.
So are there three then amendments we're looking at that we looked at: the biosphere, the goal, and then a nod to climate change as part of the context? Yeah. Council, any other comments, or how do you feel on that? I'm going to go to Councillor Kroll first.
With the points that the Director of Planning has captured and what's been considered within reasonable work within a DPA, I would move the request as amended.
No seconder for that? Not seeing a seconder. Okay, Councillor D'Andrea, did you second it?
Yes, I'll second. But
okay, all right. Thank you.
Not we can discuss, right? I would like just because when it says here on the third bullet, right, the DPA update on page 23rd, when it talks about identifying wildlife corridors and identifying keystone species, it's just important not to forget the species at risk that obviously we are supposed to do as well. It's just because it's not really highlighted here.
Okay. Is that an easy amendment to do, Council Director? Species of risk?
We can reference that as a fourth amendment.
Okay. Okay.
And obviously and habitat protection of guidelines for this.
Okay.
habitat.
So keep pushing it, Council Andrade. More
No.
words, more words, more words. No, I know,
It's
I know what you're trying to accomplish. I understand that, and
Mayor,
I
you
value
know-
that.
You know what it is? It's because protecting means something, right? For
Yeah.
you need to specify what protect means. It's not to put a fence around the tree.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded, and we've captured several changes. Corporate officer?
Yes, I'm unclear on all the changes, and I'm hoping the Director of Planning was able to capture and can give me a little bit of a hand with it. What I have is that that the request for proposal to update development permit areas number 1 and 2 PLN-2022-01 be approved, subject to referencing the Biosphere Reserve at section 2.1 and referencing the species at risk. I believe there was another one, and then there was, and revising the professional qualifications. And I'm not sure that I have captured your motion as intended. I'm pretty sure I have left something out, or I haven't caught the whole thing. And I'm wondering if Director of Planning has done a better capture than me.
I did not reference the professional. Oh, yes, I did. So that's the 5th. So there's 5 changes. One is the Biosphere Reserve reference in section 2.1. Another is adding the goal of creating ecosystem resiliency as part of DPA number 2. Another one is referencing species at risk and habitat protection in a new area of concern. And then another one is to add language around the DPA update after best management practices to ensure ecosystem resilience to climate change. So I can draft that for you, Rebecca, and send it to you. And then it'll go to council for adoption before we can send this RFP out.
Thank you. I just want to be sure that council has the motion in mind that when they vote. Thank you.
Councilor Andrade?
Thank you. It's just when we refer to the biosphere, it's just important to refer the goals, which is conservation of landscapes, ecosystem, species, and genetic variation. This is really key.
Okay, we'll capture that. Okay. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. You understand what you're voting on, council? All in favor? Thank you. This won't come back to tonight's meeting, but it will come back to, I'm hoping, to the next meeting of council for a final approval, and then the RFP can go out, and we remain on track with the timing, subject to hearing from the proponents. So thank you, everybody, for good conversation. But I just felt that we needed to move forward and to continue to study the issue. So otherwise, it'll be fall on your laps right in the middle of an election. Give it 1 month delay. So okay. We'll go on to the staff report, and here we go to the corporate officer and the CAO for the Administrative Department, Corporate and Legislative Service 4th quarter report.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Beamish. I'll start out with the first part of the report, and then I'll have Rebecca complete the last part of the report. So I'd like to thank Rebecca and Lorraine for their significant help in putting this report together. It's the Q4 report for the Administration Department, which includes the Chief Administrative Officer, the Director of Corporate and Legislative Services, and also the Manager of Corporate and Legislative Services, Tracy Hinks, who started on December 13th. The Communications Coordinator, the ICBC Audit Plan and Driver's License Services, and the clerks and administrative assistants that make up the department. There's a number of initiatives on the strategic plan based on the workshop we had back in the fall with Tracy Lawrenson, and subsequently November 23rd, we discussed the priorities of the strategic plan and how they are going to be identified for 2022, and staff is working towards incorporating those into the budget process in the coming weeks and months. We continue to look at managing our assets as part of the strategic plan, and in particular, not only the budget and financial assets, but of course, Gibson's is world renowned for the natural assets, and we had significant recognition by the December 11th, 2021 feature article in the Globe and Mail. We continue to collaborate on a number of regional issues. We've got great cooperation amongst the Sunshine Coast with the various levels of staff and the councils and the boards. One area that would exemplify that is we just had a coordination of assistance with our building officials, where we have a gap in filling the personnel for the town of Gibson's, and the Sunshine Coast Regional District staff have come on board to assist us. So that's been greatly appreciated. There's a number of meetings attended by myself, including some SCRD budget meetings and infrastructure services meetings. I still continue to have weekly SCRD and CSHELT CAO meetings. We've started and are including, I'm going to be adding the CSHELT as well to monthly interface issues meetings, which is basically senior directors and managers of the various departments of the organizations on the coast, looking at emerging issues with regard to planning or recreation or anything we have in common at a staff level, and how we can best work together on areas that don't really necessarily respect geographic or intergovernmental boundaries. So it's been really a good initiative that's been started in recent months. There's a number of other meetings that have been attended and committees, including the Holland Lands and RCMP committee. We also have our continued weekly manager meetings, where the management team here talks about day-to-day issues, and including council agendas and reports, and how best to serve each other and serve council. And there's also some more work with regard to the Holland Lands that will be coming up later in this evening on the regular meeting. And we'll continue to look at the RCMP contract. We'll know probably on February 9th what our population is. If it's greater than 5,000, that's when the census data is released, then we'll have a lot of work ahead of us. If it's less than 5,000, then we might not have as much work with that committee. But it's been a really great initiative that council's started up, and working with Mayor Beamish to get the personnel from both the province and our local RCMP division involved, as well as people in the community that have RCMP experience. So yeah, and then also I'd like to again acknowledge Ms. Machado, who's on our Zoom call and our committee meeting today. And Manny was in the office for the first time today, and we've been working on kind of a return to work schedule, whereby be phasing out of my services and the phasing in of his services based on his health recommendations for the weeks and months ahead. So we'll be developing a more concrete plan once we get a feeling of what files I might retain and which ones he'll take over immediately. So that concludes my part, and unless there's any questions, I can turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Mark. Rebecca, you want to continue?
Sure. You can see there's a lot of detailed administrative tasks that are listed here. I'll try and just hit on them lightly and summarize them. And you can read up if you're curious to know more. You can reach out and ask me questions. We continue processing permits, filming permits, as well as use of public place permits. And they're listed there. We continue to provide meeting supports. And that includes, of course, agenda building, setting up and distributing links, posting notices, acting as recording secretary, drafting the minutes and following through on actions arising, and communicating with delegations and presenters for proclamations and making sure that those get coordinated. We attend a lot of meetings. You can see there's quite a long list, and they're not all just meetings like this one or the regular council meetings. They can cover a broad range of things like the Gibson's Harbor Authority AGM, workshops, community dialogues, and community group meetings with community groups or interested parties who require a meeting to discuss a particular issue. And we also had the pleasure with Councillor Kroll of having a youth council, a meeting with our youth council representatives, and giving them a brief introduction and orientation towards their role as youth representatives to council. And that was really interesting and pleasant to do. We continue to provide services as commissioner for taking affidavits. This is primarily for individuals in our community who are living here as expatriates and need certification of pension documents. I field a lot of inquiries and complaints. The list here actually doesn't cover everything, but most of these are the ones that came through the mayor and council at gibsons.ca email, which you then receive copies of, and which generally get a response in varying degrees of detail depending on the issue, and may in fact turn into something quite more significant than just an exchange of phone calls or emails. Can actually turn into meetings or go beyond into something that requires more action from staff or the involvement of council at different levels. You can see it covers a really broad range of topics. And so at any given day, I may be digging into and familiarizing myself with any number of issues for which I haven't directly been involved, but am trying to help someone understand how the office responds and processes our requests and how we handle documents, any variety of things that I can try and help people to understand why we are doing what we're doing and how we come to the decisions that we have. And they can be a significant amount of work. In addition to the matters that I field, our administrative assistants at the front desk also receive many inquiries and complaints that aren't even on this list. They handle an info@gibsons.ca email, and they will bring me in as needed, or they may field it themselves, or they may simply redirect it to the appropriate staff. And of course, there's people who come in person that might need various degrees of attention or response. And the two issues they mentioned to me that they felt were most common and notable in the fourth quarter of 2021 were issues around homeless people in tents and camps, and issues around snow removal, and particularly inquiries about how property owners are responsible for clearing snow from sidewalks. We provide a lot of community supports, the most active in Q4 being the Tree Bylaw Select Committee, the Holland Lands Cultural Corner Revitalization Select Committee, the Police Transition Select Committee, and the Public Arts Advisory Committee. There are other meetings that we support, Board of Variance or ADP, but the Planning Department is more in the lead on those, but we provide support only if needed or as needed. There are some educational activities that these mostly list ones I've been involved in. Very, very useful and helpful information, and I've appreciated the chance to do that. We have leases and licenses to occupy that need attention. They've gotten some attention, and I need to pick up and see them through, and I'm hoping to carry those forward and get them moving. Land title office documentation, it usually involves registration of documentation at the land title office, usually with regard to development permits, development various permits, or the registration of covenants, or perhaps the cancellation of a covenant. The IT liaison role continues to absorb a fair amount of time of the administration team. We continue to have our VoIP telephone project, continuing, the last step being the upgrading of our alarm systems so that they are no longer connected to the landline. As once we transition to the VoIP system, the landline will not be needed. We wanted to be sure our alarm system, there'd be no interruption in our intrusion alarms and our fire alarms. So we have had that completed at Town Hall and the Public Works Yard and the Parks Building. And we're continuing now to get ready to move forward with the porting of the VoIP system. There's a brief discussion has happened around an internet project. It hasn't taken off yet, but it's on our radar. And the council chambers audiovisual upgrade, we've had meetings, and since this fourth quarter was finished, we've received quotes and we're working on the beginning of preparing a report for council. Freedom of information and protection of privacy. There's 6 requests have been completed in 2021. There's 4 that remain outstanding. One of these, as you know, involved parties litigating and required a court order for unredacted documents to go to the party requesting them. And that has happened. And now I'm getting requests by consent for unredacted documents, which is much easier on me than having to proof and read them and decide where there's breaches of privacy or not. The Office of the Ombudsperson, there was a very substantive and detailed, which was a very time-consuming response, actually. It was quite the process. That was completed on October 4th. The complaint was actually filed in May, but the response went in October 4th. And in the first quarter of this year, we got the closing summary, which you have and will be reviewing at the in-camera session. Council conferences and seminars, staff have completed registrations and set you up for the AVICC in April and the UBCM 2022 conference in September. Here's hoping well, I don't know if you hope, but they'll either be in person or they'll switch to being online. Right now, they're scheduled to be in person. So if you're happy about that, you'll be looking forward to it. A number of contracts we have been working on and that they pop up. There's a few I've noticed are actually missing. There was the memorandum of understanding for CAPU is actually not on this list. And the CAO, Mark Brown, mentioned the agreement with the SCRD. Oh, it is here, the assistance we provided for the building official services. Our ICBC auto plan and driver's licensing services, they've had quite the changes happening with people returning from leave, people going on leave, quite the scheduling, and they have really impressed me with their flexibility and their sense of team. They've really stepped up to cover for each other as needed and maintaining the services through the holiday season despite extreme weather. And when the rest of us were away for holidays, they were here and they're doing a great job. I hear very positive things about the service that is provided here at the office in both ICBC auto plan and driver services. And we are now preparing to roll out the new enhanced care program and get the word out to those who have used the town of Gibson's for their renewals. And probably one of the happiest times here was the addition to our team of Tracy Hinks. She's was introduced to council at a previous meeting and she's here tonight and she's been a wonderful support to me, an excellent addition to our team. And I'm very pleased to have her. And after working together for a month, I'm beginning to see a light where I'm going to be able to tackle things that I haven't been able to tackle as a result of all the things that she's now taking off my plate. She is now our IT liaison. So if you are having a spam email problem or something's going wrong with your equipment, she will be the one to talk to. I will still see through the VoIP project as it's nearing the end, and I've been involved in it for the past year. I hit my 1-year anniversary today. It's been my pleasure to be with you for the last year. And so I will see through the VoIP project, but she will take it forward. So when you have IT issues, she's now our liaison. Thank you, Tracy. And she's also been a tremendous help with me on the processing of our budget tracking and invoice tracking. She's been a big help with the scheduling of these meetings. You'll see her often on the meetings along with me. And I worry that she not burn herself out by staying here too late. So we will share the hosting as needed, but she's been setting up the Zoom meetings and helping me with that. She has done a great job of bonding with our admin team. She's now, Tamara and Lisa now report to Tracy. So if you have a question about something you'd like Tamara or Lisa to be helping you with, you want to run it past Tracy. And she's familiarized herself with iCompass and is helping with the agenda building, drafting minutes, action tracking, and tremendous help with committee supports for the Holland Lands and OH&S committee, as well as the police transition select committee. And I'm so grateful to have that help. And I thank council for approving and making that possible. It's really made my situation here much better. And we're all just really grateful to have that addition to our team. So let me just say that our team has also really impressed me in their help. As you remember, when Lori Moseman left, we're still short an assistant to the Department of Planning. And we're still short an accounting clerk at finance. And Tamara and Lisa have really impressed me with their sense of team spirit and their cheerful willingness to pitch in and take on extra work and help. And it is not easy. It's meant learning new tasks that they haven't had responsibility for before, and very crowded desks with a very full schedule. And occasionally some OT may be needed from time to time as a result, but we are working towards growing our team back to where it was. And they're just, if you take a moment to say thank you, because it really helps keep this place running. And I don't want to forget, even though Marcy Beecham Fuller, who used to report to me, now reports to Dave, I know she goes above and beyond the call of duty as well. And I know she has for me recently on something I needed help with. So we have a really great team. You'll see Elizabeth's report here. Elizabeth is in the attendee section. I'm going to bring her over so she can answer questions. And Elizabeth, Mayor, if you don't mind, she might wish to speak to her section on this report. She drafted it and I've simply placed it in here. I'm trying to move her over, Tracy. I'm wondering if it might need a little help from you. Here she comes. So you can see what Elizabeth has listed in all the many things she's done. And if you have questions, she's here and can answer them. And you'll also note that the final piece is the Finance Department's report on council expenses for 2021. So thanks for your time and listening to me. I'm not sure that everything we're doing is always of primary importance to you, but sometimes it can surprise you what's going on inside the office that you don't notice. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca. Elizabeth, give you an opportunity, because I know that this doesn't reflect all of what you do in terms of the information you have to provide and how you have to piece things together for us. So what have you found to be the biggest challenge, and how are we in terms of the, do you have any sense of who's following us and how big an audience we have out there?
I can tell you the digital newsletter, I think, has been probably our best addition to our communications plan over the last couple of years. The audience grows every month. I think we're somewhere around 2,000 people, 2,000 email addresses in our database. And we get about a 65 to 70% open rate, which is very good. I know from MailChimp sort of provides me what industry averages are. And I think industry average for local government's about 40%. So a 60 to 70% open rate's really good. And I try to take every opportunity that I can to encourage people to sign up to join our digital email base just to continue growing it. Yeah, I don't know. This is actually a pretty fulsome list of the various things that I did last quarter. It's definitely a wide variety. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I think one of the things that jumps out at me is the fact that we're able to, through you, put information out. I hope in advance of something happening, but certainly when something happens. I mean, I think that we also always have to be sensitive that the public is going to be aware of what's going on in the community. And, when they see something happening, like whether it's explaining the reasons why a tree has been removed, maybe explain the reason why a tree is going to be removed, if we can anticipate that, so that we reduce the number of questions. But being able to use the communication process to get information out to people in a timely way, and also to survey them in terms of their likes and dislikes, their wants and wishes for the community. I think it's very valuable to get to that point. So thank you for that. And I know that in terms of some of the things that I've been involved in, I think of the watershed, and how responsive you were and able to put information together and continue to put information together, just knowing that that site is there. I can send you material and it gets on. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for all you do. And Rebecca and Mark, thank you as well, and staff. You guys do a phenomenal job. I am in here pretty much every day, so that I do see that, and I know the rest of council doesn't get the same opportunity as I do. But I also see the good nature, the good spirit in this office, the feeling in this office. I mean, it's so positive to be welcomed to come into the office by the staff that we have work at the front counter. That's the key. If people can come in here and have their spirits raised, be received in a respectful and pleasant manner, that really breaks down barriers. Somebody who came in with an angry face can't hold it for very long. When they're sitting talking to people at our front counter. So I really appreciate that. And the volume of work, that's what these reports are to reflect, is that volume of work that is there, that we all need to be reminded of every quarter and every year. So thank you for that. Oh, turn to council. Councillor D'Andrade first.
Thank you. Yes, on that note, Elizabeth, when Mayor Bemis mentioned that I remember at least reading one note on the tree being cut. I wonder if it's possible to also have mention on trees that have been planted, and who knows, in the near future, start plotting in a map so we can say, this year that was, because obviously we get very sensitive when trees are cut. But if we know at least that we know in theory that I think when trees are cut, trees are supposed to be planted, but it would be nice to even have a map that shows that.
Yeah, we can definitely do that on public lands. We did do that. There is a tree that came down, I believe it was on Seaview a couple of months ago. So we had on-site signage explaining the reason that the tree needed to come down. And we did in that case also say that I think it was 3 or 4 more trees were going to be planted in replacement of that tree. So,
but if it's possible, I'm sure there might be some planning involvement, but when we know where these trees are going to be planted, that will be also wonderful, right? So people really know. One thing is to say, well, trees will be planted when, but if we know, okay, that will be planted, I think it would create more confidence as well with the tree bylaw. And
sure, yep.
Who else had their hand up? Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. No, I just wanted to sort of carry on with what you were mentioning earlier, how responsive Elizabeth is with communicating information out to the public. Different times I've come across issues from sitting on different committees that I sit on, like the Ferry Advisory Board, when the schedule was being changed, and Elizabeth was on it immediately, which just really helps, people prepare themselves for things that change in the community. When we had the snowfall, getting the information out about the who's responsible for clearing what. The other thing I think it's kudos to staff again, because when you do spend any time in the town hall, you realize that even though staff are there for 8 hours a day, and you think, oh, all the work they're going to get done in 8 hours. No, when you look at the staff at the front desk, they're up and down like kangaroos, with people in and out and having to deal with things and run around. They phone someone's office, they're not there, they go running around hunting for them. So it's not just it's not easy. And then you get taken away from the work you were doing and trying to get back into it. So I have great respect for the people that work in that environment. And, I can't express it enough that, they're quite amazing. Having an office door and being able to shut it, they don't have that luxury. So thanks to, the staff on the front desk and Elizabeth, just for, I know when I was the alternate on the regional district board, the complaints that came to the RD because of the lack of communication and the problems that the regional district and directors faced because information wasn't getting out. And we're very fortunate with Elizabeth that she helps us get ahead of issues. So thumbs up.
Councillor Ludwig?
Basically, just wanted to echo everything Councillor Kroll just said. I just want to say thanks to Mark, Rebecca, and Elizabeth for all the work you do, and all the front desk staff. My husband was in there today getting a permit put through the the new iCloud system, and he came back saying the people at the front desk were so nice. He was raving about them, so I thought, oh, that's a nice compliment to hear. Yeah. So anyways, just wanted to say thank you again, and I just know that your efforts don't go unnoticed. We all recognize how hard you guys all work. So thank you.
And be careful, because Councillor Lumley might hire some of our front desk staff away. It's front of the house people are really important. No. Okay, well, Council, we've come to the end of this agenda. We're going to go now to inquiries. And Rebecca, invite anybody to come forward.
Yes, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, it's either *6 or *9. I'm not sure which. Try them both. One of them will work. And we'll watch for your hand to go up. Mayor Beamish, I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, well, in that case, we're going to be able to break early and have a little bit of a longer period for our supper tonight. So that I thank you for that. Our next meeting of the Committee of the Whole will be on February 15th at 3 p.m. And I'll invite to ask Council for a motion to adjournment. Councillor Kroll, Councillor Dindrad, thank you. And thank you, everybody. And thank you to the public and to staff who joined us this afternoon. And we'll see many of you tonight. So all in favor of adjournment? Thank you.